Tonight, we are busting myths about real estate in Northern Michigan. Thanks for joining me. My name is Geno D'Angelo. We've got a fun one planned for you tonight. As you know, every Thursday at 7 p.m., rain or shine, I come to you live from downtown Petoskey. Oh. As you know, every Thursday at 7 p.m. Oh, hold on. I'm getting a little bit of feedback here. One second. I had a little bit of an issue. All right. I think we're better now. Sorry about that. I had the screen open that I was making sure I was checking how it looked on the other screen. So as you know, get back into it. Every Thursday at 7 p.m., I come to you live to talk to you about what is actually going on in Northern Michigan real estate from somebody that is in the trenches every single day. And what I like about this time of year is I come right from listing and selling real estate, helping buyers and sellers right into these lives and deliver you the most actionable quality education about Northern Michigan real estate. I'm super excited about our live tonight because we're going to be busting myths. And another thing that I think is really cool about this time of year is, in the winter months, we have to create content and create schedules and try to figure out what we want to talk about. In this time of year, whatever, I just talk to you about things that I'm coming in contact with every day. And I've been collecting what I call myths about things that I've heard my clients say over the last couple of weeks. I've had a note app and I've had the note app open on my phone or on the iPad. And I've wrote down some things that I've heard people say that simply were not true. So we're here to debunk all the myths in Northern Michigan real estate. As always, this is meant to be an interactive, live conversation. If there's anything you want to talk about in regards to Northern Michigan, whether you're thinking about moving here, whether you already live here, whether you're just enthusiastically interested in Northern Michigan, thank you so much for joining me. If you have not yet subscribed to the channel, I know a lot of you are watching this live, but a lot of you watch this after you watch the recording after we post it. Please, it would mean the world to me if you would hit that subscribe button. We are growing the channel. We gained more subscribers last month than we ever have before. And I couldn't do this without you. And it really allows us to make better and better videos. So without further ado, let's get into it. My name is Geno D'Angelo. I'm a local Northern Michigan real estate broker. I've been selling in Northern Michigan for the last 22 years, which I just realized the other day is over half of my life. So I've been doing this for a long time. I've seen everything. I've been through everything. I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. It is definitely an interesting time in Northern Michigan real estate. So if you have any questions about any of the myths or anything you want to talk about, don't hesitate to drop a comment. Let me know also where you're watching from. I think it's incredibly interesting to see where we're reaching, where people currently live that are interested in relocating here, and it just helps make the whole experience better. So without further ado, let's get into it. The one that I heard, and I hear this a lot, is that summer is the busiest selling season, and that's simply not the case. Summer is definitely a busy time of year in Northern Michigan, but it is not the busiest selling season. Believe it or not, the shoulder months are the busiest, meaning spring, which is what we're in right now, and we're incredibly busy. Spring is typically the busiest. The summer, people are just sort of here. They're hanging out. They're busy. They're going to grad parties. They've got kids in sports. They're doing family trips, just trying to make the most out of Northern Michigan summer or summer everywhere. And then once the summer starts to cool off, and this is for a couple of reasons. Once the summer ends, it seems like the market gets busy again, mainly because people who have houses that have wanted to use it for one last time or wanted the family had to enjoy one last summer in the house, they typically put those on the market in the fall, which obviously when there's more inventory, there's going to be more buyers. When there's more inventory and buyers, that's going to be a busier market. And to be honest, for a long time, October was my busiest month, which is really interesting because my birthday is October 21st. And I had maybe I forget exactly, but it was like a 6 or 7 year stretch where I had a closing every year on my birthday. So tough way to beat that. So summer is definitely not the busiest selling season. So that is a myth. Number two is the only people moving here. And I heard this was actually a comment that somebody left on YouTube. The only people moving here are retirees. False. That is a myth. While a large percentage of the people that are buying in Northern Michigan have been and always will be retirees, they're not the only ones. There's a lot of everybody. There's a lot of obviously retirees. There's a lot of remote workers. There's a lot of people that, have a smaller house that want to buy a bigger house here. There's a lot of people, there's the move up crowd. There's the downsize crowd. Obviously remote workers. So yeah, that is definitely false. It's not only retirees moving to Northern Michigan. This is another one I heard. The only way, and this was another comment on YouTube. Somebody said the only way you are going to sell a house for over $1 million in northern Michigan is for it to be on the water, and that is a myth. There are plenty of houses that are on the market that have sold this year, last year, the year before that are well over $1 million that don't have any water amenity. There's several houses in downtown Petoskey right now, several in downtown Traverse City. I just saw there's a few in Boyne City, Harbor Springs that are just simply nice houses in great locations that do not have any water amenity. No waterfront, no water view, no water access. They're just beautiful big homes in great locations, and that is driving the prices up and allowing those sellers to get a premium. This was an interesting one. Cabins and vacation homes do not need inspections. Now, I want to say this is more of a myth. Um, Unless you are incredibly handy, regardless of what house you're considering buying, I would always recommend that you do a home inspection simply because you just don't know what you don't know. And oftentimes the biggest issues as somebody that has sold, at this point, 600 or 700 houses in my career, uh, the biggest issues that I've seen come up in home inspections were actually items that the seller was not aware of, meaning they've owned the house, something was happening behind the scenes. I had this house one time on Burt Lake, I'll never forget, and we were under contract for just under 800,000, and this was probably 7 8 years ago when 800,000 was a lot of money on Burt Lake. And one of the most meticulous sellers I had ever met. He took great care of the house. Just it was an older house, but it was in perfect condition. Get the house under contract. We go to do the inspection, and the attic space above the garage was full of mold, and he wasn't aware of it. Obviously, he had it fixed, but had that person skipped that inspection, again, the seller didn't know, the buyer had no way of knowing, but had they skipped the inspection, they would have completely missed that, and they would have been on the hook, because once you close on a property and you sign that as is condition at the closing table, everything from that day forward is your responsibility. Now, if you find that the seller knew, and this is where it gets tricky, but if you find that something came up that the seller knew about that they didn't disclose, obviously you can hire a lawyer. I've never had anybody do that, thank God. And I do think I've heard of a couple people that have been in that, have went down that path. And what I've learned is it's very hard to figure out if the seller knew of a defect or not. So something to keep in mind. Tourist season, this goes back to, this should have been number 2, but tourist season is the only time to list your house. And again, I would actually say I think it's better to list in the spring or in the fall. Certainly we sell a lot of houses in the summertime, and this is the time of year when we're seeing a lot of houses come on the market. But I'll tell you that July, August stretch is not as busy as you think it is. There's a lot of people up here looking, but that is the time of year when people live in both northern Michigan and Michigan. And oftentimes buying a house just isn't a top priority during those months, meaning if they wanted to use it for the summer, they bought it in the spring, or they're going to wait to see what happens in the fall with the added inventory. So that's something that definitely surprises people, and also something we're going to start watching when we track, how many houses sell each month and that sort of thing. This is another question I had on the phone with a YouTube buyer. Every home in northern Michigan appreciates quickly. That's also false. So northern Michigan is a lifestyle made up, or is a community made up. I would say this: northern Michigan is a community made up of different sub-communities, different lifestyles. It's really like a living organism, meaning there's $10 million houses here and there's $10,000 houses here, believe it or not. And depending on where you are, what lake, the quality of the house, the quality of the town, the location in town, those things all affect at what rate a home appreciates. So I would definitely say homes in northern Michigan do not appreciate at the same level across the board. However, I will say northern Michigan, from an investment standpoint, especially over the last handful of years, has been a very solid investment, meaning properties have appreciated at incredibly high rates. It'll be interesting to see what that looks like at the end of this year, because it does feel like, at least for the very moment, that house values are starting to cool a little bit. But to this point, a lot of the conversations I'm having with sellers and anybody who's owned their house for 5 years or more is still in very good shape, in terms of what their house is worth versus what they've paid, meaning the return on investment. And, assuming you've maintained the house and kept it in nice condition, you can expect if you bought your house 10 years ago, it's probably worth at least twice of what you paid now, which, hey, tough to beat that investment. There's always tons of land available. Somebody mentioned that, somebody actually asked me, they said, it seems like there's less land available now than there used to be, which is true. I think the land market is one of the segments of the market that has gotten the least amount of attention. We talk about how expensive houses have gotten. We talk about how expensive houses have gotten in Traverse City, Petoskey, Harbor Springs, Boyne City, the nice, even Gaylord, the nice areas. How expensive waterfront homes have gotten from a second home standpoint, but we don't ever really talk about uh, how expensive land has gotten. It just sort of goes under the radar, and maybe it's because you can't easily go on Zillow and look for land, but for whatever reason, we don't talk enough about land. And I remember maybe 3 years ago, I had a 10-acre parcel that was that a gentleman came to me. He was an Italian guy. He called me because I was Italian, which is a funny story. Who had this piece of property in Resort Township, which is probably one of the most expensive townships in the state. Resort Township has a lot of Petoskey in it, a lot of Walloon, Bay Harbor. So it's a very expensive township. But this was just a 10-acre parcel, just sort of out in the country. And he wanted $110,000 for it, which I thought was absolutely insane. But oftentimes he was stubborn, like a lot of older Italian guys are, which I know better than anybody. Wanted this price. So in order to earn his business, I said, let's try this for a little bit. And if it doesn't work, we can always reduce the price. So, which is not the advice I normally give. So don't take that for the right. Do as I say, not as I do. So we list this property for $110,000, 10 acres, and it sells like that. And I thought, got my calculator out. I'm like, that's over $10,000 an acre, which I remember early in my career when the best spots in Emmett County were selling for like $4,000 an acre, which back then that was a lot. And it hasn't stopped since that day. I'm not saying that day started it, but vacant land has gotten incredibly expensive. And we've seen 40-acre parcels in Resort Township go for, $300,000 or more. So we're talking about, $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 for vacant land. There's been some significant waterfront land sales around the Bay in Harbor Springs, Traverse City, Charlevoix. Land is getting incredibly expensive here. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that people are building some pretty extravagant homes in Northern Michigan. And that's, again, something we talk about a little. We talk about how expensive the building costs are and that sort of thing, but we actually don't talk about, if you're in Northern Michigan this summer, if you're here right now, drive around Traverse City, the peninsula, Old Mission Peninsula, drive around Petoskey, Boyne City, Harbor Springs. There are some incredibly big, incredibly beautiful houses being built here. And the builders I talk to say, look, these are people that have worked their whole life. They sold their company. They cashed out. They've got a windfall, and they're going to spend it on their dream home in Northern Michigan. And they are definitely building their dream home. So I think along with that has sort of like the chicken and the egg. Are the home prices expensive because of the land or because of the building costs? And obviously I think it's a little bit of both. We did close on a lot this week up in Harborview Hills, which, if you're not familiar, is a really nice subdivision just a little bit south. I guess we'll call it a little bit, not south, a little bit northeast of Petoskey, just off Mitchell. This person bought a very nice lot that was listed for, I think it was at 130. Then they reduced it to like 120, 110, and he got it for 90. So this is just an example of, we often talk about the deals people are finding right now, and they're out there. Our last few buyer deals have been significantly under list price, which, if you're thinking about buying, and I'm not saying this to brag, but it's interesting because we've gotten a few of our buyer offers accepted under list price, but the last 2 or 3 listings we've sold have been for full price. So the market is still strong if you know how to navigate it. So whether you're a seller or buyer watching this, if you're thinking about doing something real estate related in Northern Michigan and you want to have a conversation about how to have the most success, meaning get the most amount of money if you're a seller or get the best deal if you're a buyer, reach out to me and I'd love to help you, because we're doing both. We're getting great prices for our sellers and we are picking the spots to find deals for our buyers. And they're still out there. I think both are a little bit few and far between. I do think it is a little bit harder to get a full price or over asking offer on a listing. And I do think it's a little bit harder to get a significantly under asking offer accepted, but both are possible. And you just have to have the right strategy, which is something I'm super passionate about. So if that's on your mind or you just want to have a conversation, reach out and I would love to help you. Out of state buyers will pay any price. I can't tell you how often I've got a listing and they said, all we need is this one person, this one rich person from, Texas to come buy our house and they're going to pay our overinflated list price. And that's simply just not the case. Um, sure. Out of state buyers budgets are probably one of the biggest culprits to values going up in Northern Michigan, but it's not the only reason in there. Just because you're not from Michigan doesn't mean you're going to make silly choices and overpay for stuff. So out of state buyers will not pay any price for a house in Northern Michigan. The next one was you can't sell a house if it's on a dirt road. And again, that's a myth because there's a lot of roads in Northern Michigan that a lot of houses that are on dirt roads. I just listed a house in Gaylord, which we'll be touring pretty soon. $1 million, beautiful home. It was on a dirt road, not only a dirt road, but a seasonal dirt road, which is, sort of like a double whammy, meaning not only is it only really accessible or you have to figure out how to plow it in the winter time, but it's not paved. And look, a lot of people that come to Northern Michigan for a reprieve or look to get away from it all prefer not being on a paved road. That means you're off the beaten path. There's not going to be a ton of traffic around you. Kind of a fun fact, when I went to college at Oakland in Metro Detroit, one of my favorite pastimes was this is when I was first starting to understand how tax records work. And for those of you that know or don't know, the Detroit Pistons used to play in Auburn Hills, which is like the next town over from Rochester. So it was interesting that you would just be like at the Meyer and you'd see the Pistons, or we were at the college gym one time and Barry Sanders was there. But anyways, when Rasheed Wallace played for the Pistons, he actually had a beautiful house, but it was on a dirt road. And I always think of that story anytime anybody tells me about, not wanting to be on a dirt road or not wanting to deal with a road that was unpaved because, maybe you have to wash your car a little bit more than you'd like to, but I wouldn't totally rule a house out just because it's not on a paved road. We get this one a lot. You need 20% down to buy a house. And again, that's a myth. You can buy a house depending if you're a VA or VA loan, FHA, you can do 0%. We have RD loans here, rural development, which is something that is specific for rural areas like Northern Michigan. We don't see a ton of those right now, but there's RD, there's FHA, there's VA, and there's even conventional. You can do conventional 5% down, 10% down, 15% down, 20% down. So while a lot of people are electing to put 20% down, you do not have to put 20% down. Now, if you don't put 20% down, you're going to have to pay PMI, which is private mortgage insurance, which is what insures the loan in case you default. There's a couple of ways around that. One, put 20% down. Two, after a certain period of time, you can have the appraiser come back out and reevaluate your home. And if you have the 20% equity built in over time, you can get rid of your PMI, which is going to save you, ask your lender $100, $200 a month. Houses on the water have higher taxes than houses off the water. That is a myth. If you're in the same township, if you have two houses, one is on the water, one is on the water. If you have two houses, one is not on the water, one is on the water, and they're both the same taxable value in the same township. Fun fact, they will have the same tax bill, meaning you don't get an extra tax just for being on the water. Houses are taxed based on half of the value multiplied by the millage rate. That is how you calculate the taxes. The other caveat is whether it's homestead or non-homestead. So if those two houses I spoke about earlier, if they are both homesteaded or both non-homesteaded, they should have exactly the same property tax. So that is a myth I've heard for years and years, is just because a house is on the water does not mean it has higher taxes than a house off the water. Now, typically houses on the water have higher taxes than houses on the water, off the water, because they're worth more. So that is definitely something to keep in mind. If you're selling a home, you should price the home high to test the waters. We've all heard the saying, you can go up, but you can't come down. Sorry, you can go down, but you can't come up, which I actually believe is not true. So there's two myths in this. One, it's not a good idea to price your house high to test the waters, because we see this every time we take a new listing. We put the house on the market. That first 3, 4, 5 days, you get all of the interest, and either the house goes under contract or it lags. Now we do a really good job and we try really hard to make sure our house is going under contract during that period because you only have one chance to make a first impression. And the second part of that myth is you can always go down, but you can't go up with your price. And I disagree with that because if you price your home just a hair under the market value, it's going to cause more buyers to be exposed to the property. It's going to give you more interest in the property, which ultimately should give you a higher offer or multiple offers for the property. So we've been doing it since before it was popular. We try to price the houses either right at market value or right below market value to hope to create a bidding war, because I always say the best way to get the most amount of money for your home is not by having one offer, it's by having multiple offers. And that's just come true. And that's proved true so many times. Sellers never pay buyers' closing costs. Again, that's a myth. Oftentimes, whether it's cash management or for whatever reason, when you buy a house, buying a house is probably one of the most expensive endeavors most people are going to go through in their lifetime. And I've often had people elect to roll in $5,000 of their closing costs, which saves them $5,000 out of pocket, but then changes their mortgage payment $10 a month or whatever the number is. I have mixed feelings on that. One, if you want to have a lot of cash reserves during that time, which I totally understand, that is not a bad strategy. The downside of that is you are financing that extra $5,000 over the life of the loan, which could turn that $5,000 into $15,000 very easily. Also, they don't just automatically, the seller doesn't just give you $5,000, meaning typically how it goes is the seller accepts your $300,000 offer. You offer 305 with $5,000 back for closing costs. So you basically just inflate your offer by $5,000 and they give $5,000 back to you. So something we see all the time. Sellers are typically open to it as long as they understand what is happening. Northern Michigan homes are never cheap. Again, that's becoming more true, but that's still false. There are still tons of affordable, sometimes even homes that I would call cheap. If you start looking in some of the outlying areas, east of I-75, east of Indian River, places like Onaway, Rogers City, Alpena, there's still a lot of affordable houses over there. Even south of Gaylord, you start talking about Frederick, Grayling, Roscommon, still some affordable houses there. And even if you start going out towards between, Charlevoix and Traverse City, even south of Traverse City, Kingsley, Mesick, still a ton of affordable houses out there. I will be honest that it's getting harder to find cheap houses and harder to find affordable houses, but they are out there. And with prices starting to cool a little bit, I think we're going to see more and more coming. Ian, who is our loan expert, says money in the bank is better than lower payment. Exactly. I definitely agree with that. And that's why that's one of the reasons I'm in favor of adding your closing costs in is, look, it's when you're buying a house, that's a very expensive time of life. Why not have a couple extra bucks in your pocket? You could always pay down your loan extra if you want to. Ian says, have one closing in Kingsley, 20 minutes to TC for $230,000 next week. Yeah, that's a good point, Ian. Actually, I was at a cabin in Baldwin over Memorial Day, and Baldwin's it's a little town in Lake County, which somebody told me while I was there that Lake County is the poorest county in the state, which I don't know if that's true. It seems like it could be true, but that's what somebody told me there. That town, there's the Pere Marquette River. There's tons of ATV trails, and there was a bunch of side-by-sides and four-wheelers. So this little community in our south of Traverse City had probably, my favorite thing to do when I go to a new area is open up Zillow just to see what stuff costs, because that's just what I care about. And I could not believe how inexpensive the houses were there. So yeah, that Kingsley, Baldwin, that, anywhere on the west side between, let's say Traverse City as far down to Grand Haven, that whole Ludington, that whole west side of the state, very, very affordable prices and not a bad quality of life. If you want to get off the beaten path, have a house with some acreage or house on a river or house near the ATV trails for your side-by-side or four-wheeler or dirt bike or whatever, I think there's a lot of bang for your buck there. And those are the kind of areas that's the first, I'd only been there a couple of times. Obviously I'm on the east side of the state enough. I really wonder one day those areas are going to start getting to be more expensive, and they almost have to. That's too close to Traverse City to not be expensive. When I start talking about the east side of the state, places like Presqu'île, Onaway, Roger City, Alpena. Some of the best waterfront on Lake Huron is on Hammond Bay, which is a little town called Akiak, which is just outside of Roger City. That's a very nice stretch of waterfront that is still incredibly affordable. So there are pockets out there. If you have, and I say this a lot, if you have flexibility, there are deals to be had. And if you're not tied to a certain area, and look, and that's something I think that's one of the reasons we're going to see some of these areas improve is with remote work. As long as you have internet access, you can really work anywhere. So yeah, that's definitely something I'm going to watch. Maybe I'll do a video about those areas just to, I almost want to do a video of those areas selfishly just to have it out there. So 5 years from now, I can go back and say, hey, I knew this was going to happen and I should have put all my money there, but I didn't. Even Cadillac has a lot. Yeah. Even Cadillac has a lot of affordable opportunity. He meant to say Houghton, but Houghton Lake, Higgins Lake are super affordable. Yep. So we always talk about we should start. Yeah, that's exactly. We should start. Look, I think in our generation, this is going to be, you always hear the story of my dad. You always hear the story. My dad could have bought 2,000 feet on Walden Lake for $5,000 50 years ago, and now it's worth 20 million. That's going to be us talking about Houghton Lake or, Lake Huron over on the east side of the state. But yeah, I think they're great investment and great investment opportunities. You can't, this is another myth. You can't finance vacant land. Now, you probably can't go to a mortgage lender, a mortgage broker. You're going to have to go to your local credit union, maybe your local community bank. We've had a lot of people get home equity loans on their house, meaning they take some of the equity out of their house to buy vacant land. There's a bank called Greenstone, which does a lot of vacant land financing. They are great, but they are very slow. Coming from experience. But yeah, you can finance vacant land. Also, we have what are called land contracts, which I didn't know this until maybe 10 years ago, that land contract wasn't just like a term everybody knew that's kind of specific to Michigan. So a land contract is where the seller acts as a bank. This typically only works if the land or the house is paid off, but you got a $50,000 lot, you give the guy 20% down, which is 10 grand. You finance it over a certain amount of time. At the end of that period, there's a balloon due, and then you pay it off, and everybody's happy. Sellers like this because typically they get more money for the property, because when somebody is buying a piece of property on land contract, they typically pay more, and then also the seller collects interest along the way. Which, the reason banks have made a lot of money over since the beginning of time is from collecting interest. What I used to think is cool is you would get a $50,000. I remember selling land for $50,000 with $5,000 down, meaning they financed 45 grand with a 3-year balloon amortized over 30 years. After 3 years, they financed 45, but after 3 years, they owed 41. So because the way amortization works is the front portion of the loan is so front loaded with interest that you really don't pay down the principal very quickly. So that was a really good situation for a lot of sellers, and buyers like it just because it's simple. You write the offer. There's no credit. I mean, the seller might require some kind of credit check, but you don't have to go through the same underwriting process that you do if you get a mortgage. So we don't see a ton of those as much, but once upon a time, they were very popular. Appraisals always come in at list price. So I did a deal the other day. This is where this one came from. I did a deal the other day, and the seller was like, why do appraisals always come in at list price? And I said, well, they don't always. Sometimes they come in lower, which is not a lot of fun. Sometimes they do come in a little bit higher, but you typically don't see them come in, way over, the contract price. We just sold a house that was listed for 430. We got the offer accepted for 400. The appraisal came in at 403 or 405, something like that. And the reason I've heard that happens is I've heard that when an appraiser hits the value, they don't try to knock it out of the park, because all the bank cares about is to make sure their loan is secured. So once they find out, yep, the property's worth what they're paying for it, they stop. They're not there to run the score up to make you feel like you got a great deal. And that's just something to keep in mind. Interest rates are more important than location. This was an interesting one. This came from having a client that found the perfect house in the perfect location. They were looking in a very finite area and they found a house they liked, but they didn't like the interest rates. And I told them, look, and this was an area that there was just not a lot of houses that come up here, since I've been in the business for over 20 years. So I told them that the discussion we were having was, would you rather wait for interest rates to come down and try to find another one of these houses? Or would you rather, can you afford to buy this house and then refinance when the time comes? And they ultimately decided, they understood it made sense to them to buy the house and then wait for the rates to come down. I'm not a huge fan of date the rates, marry the house. But when you find the house you're looking for and the location you want to be in, if you're looking in a very finite area, maybe an area that doesn't have a lot of turnover, that there's just not a lot of houses, which was the case with the situation, it's better just to get into the house and as long as you can afford it, and then certainly you can refinance later. This is one of my favorites. This is probably one of every real estate agent's favorite. Is Zillow knows what my house is worth, meaning the Zestimate that I see on Zillow is good as is written in stone for the value of my house. The Zestimate is, especially in Northern Michigan, is rarely accurate to what your house is worth. Zillow's algorithm, probably in metro areas, Dallas, Detroit, Chicago, New York City, Florida, probably does a really good job of dialing in what a house is worth. But there are too many variables in Northern Michigan and a lack of consistency over a large area, meaning it's virtually impossible for the Zestimate to be right. Now they've gotten closer. I will give Zillow credit. They've gotten closer over the years, but one of the first things I do when I go to list a house or go to meet somebody to talk to them about listing their house is I look up the Zestimate, because I know that's the first thing they're going to say. And that's the first conversation we're going to have, but it is rarely accurate. But definitely a good gauge. So the Zestimate, and that's why, look, it was a couple of years ago, Zillow was actually buying homes. They had a cash buyer program where they would buy homes, and they stopped doing that just because they were not able to predict the value of homes in a scalable way. You can't buy a home without seeing it in person. Now, that's a myth. A lot of people won't buy a home without seeing it in person, which I don't blame them. But we actually just closed on a home today. My friends Rich and Cecilia moved here from Las Vegas, had never been to Northern Michigan before, bought a home not only without having ever seen the home, but without ever seeing Northern Michigan. And that is something that I think is incredibly adventurous. I really appreciate them putting their trust in us, and definitely something that we're seeing more and more people do. Look, if you've got a realtor you trust, if you've got a little bit of mental fortitude, you like to live on the edge a little bit, there's nothing wrong with that. And look, they had a great inspection done. We answered a bunch of questions. I went to the house. I brought 3 cameras to do the virtual tour. I would buy a house after going through this with enough people. I would say that I would buy a house without actually ever seeing the house. So super happy. I thought that was timely because we actually just closed on one of those things today, and they're moving from Las Vegas to Northern Michigan. So I can't wait to have them on. We're going to get the podcast fired up again and ask them what they thought about living in what was the major difference between moving from Las Vegas to Northern Michigan. The next one is septic and well inspections aren't necessary. I'll be honest with you. If I had to pick between I would probably do both. But if I had to pick between doing a home inspection or a well and septic inspection, one of the two, I would pick the well and septic inspection every time, because those are those are the situations that if something goes wrong, that is going to cost you the most amount of money, because wells and septics are both very expensive if something goes wrong, and they are very vital components to owning a house. So definitely make sure you get your well and septic checked. And I would have the water tested, and I would have the septic pumped, because that is just how I would go about that. You can always Airbnb your property. This, of course, we talk about this a lot. This is false. A lot of times you can Airbnb your property, but if you're buying a property to Airbnb it, you want to make sure that I was actually at an Airbnb symposium not that long ago, and they actually changed my mind about something. And this is why I go to events like this, because I learn a lot. I thought forever that if a township didn't have rules as it relates to short-term rentals, that was a positive. And my mind was actually changed at this event because they said all it takes is one election cycle or one new board member or new township supervisor to be against short-term rentals. And suddenly you go from no rules to having a rule. And that puts you in a very tough spot if you bought a house that you've been short-term renting. And now that you can't, there's a township, I think we talked about this last week, but there's a township, the township that covers Boyne Highlands and Nubbs Knob in Harbor Springs. It's called Pleasant View Township. That encompasses that whole area. There is probably more, I would say probably 50% of, maybe even more, of all of the short-term rentals in Harbor Springs are in that township. And I heard a rumor that they're really trying to stop short-term rentals in Pleasant View Township. And that is going to be earth-shattering, probably one of the biggest disruptions in that area that you'll ever see, because a lot of those people rent those houses out, and not only rent them out, but rent them out for a lot of money. And I think you would see a flood of inventory. So again, the same way that short-term rentals back around COVID took a lot of inventory off the market, they're starting to put a lot of inventory back on the market. I think it's really interesting how markets work where, 5 years ago, we had a big problem with everybody buying these houses for short-term rentals and not allowing people that wanted to live in them. And obviously that created a lot of conflict. And I'm not going to go into opinions about that, but it was definitely something we talked about a lot. And now it's funny how that is starting to, that same industry or that same segment of the market is actually starting to put listings back on the market. So markets will always correct themselves. And I think sometimes that's why we have to let things play out, because ultimately things always find their equilibrium and they always find where they should be, and life goes on. All homes have high-speed internet. This has certainly gotten a lot better over the last couple of years with Great Lakes putting in TrueStream, which is great fiber optic internet, and a couple of the other rural utility companies putting in high-quality, high-speed internet. There's still pockets out there that do not have internet. I've heard T-Mobile actually has great hotspots in northern Michigan for places that don't already have internet. Skylink, which is an Elon Musk company, that also, I know a bunch of people, that's something I kind of want to try out just to see how it works. But as long as you have a clear view of the sky, I've heard that works really well. So in most places you can get some sort of internet. Typically it's high speed, either cable or fiber optic. But again, that is one of the things that has made northern Michigan a haven for people working remotely, is just how much access to high speed internet we have. Everything outside, this was another comment on YouTube. I get some of the nicest comments on YouTube and I really appreciate them, but I also get some of the worst. Oh, Cecilia actually just came on. So this is actually Cecilia. I actually just told the story about how you and Rich just closed on your house today. I hope you don't mind me sharing, but Cecilia and Rich came here from Las Vegas. They relocated to northern Michigan. They bought a house. They actually, so they closed on their house today. This trip was planned for them to come see northern Michigan, but they were so excited to be here that they actually ended up buying a house and closing on it today. So unfortunately I missed their closing. I'm taking them out to lunch tomorrow, which is, I'm looking forward to it because it'll be the first time we meet in person. But Cecilia, weigh in. Is there anything, any cons, pros you would share with anybody watching if they were going to buy a house without seeing it ahead of time? Because I think you and Rich did a great job. You got Rich and Cecilia, since she's here, I'm going to brag about them. Rich and Cecilia bought a house I'm not going to tell the town because I don't want people showing up there, but they bought a house in a little town, a little rural town, and it was advertised on the MLS with, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was advertised on the MLS with 7 acres. And it had they were just about to take the house off the market, or something happened. It wasn't selling. So they looked on the county website and found out that the same owner owned 10 more acres that they were hoping to keep to build the next house. So when I drove in there and did the video tour, when I did a video tour for them, I have obviously my phone, and then I've got an Insta360, which has a 14-foot selfie stick. So it's almost like a drone. So when you pull in, there's this beautiful piece of property in this very, very nice house. And they decided that, okay, it was listed with only 4. That's what it was. It was listed with 4, but they own 17. I thought it was 7. Okay. It was listed with 4, but they own 17 acres. So Rich and Cecilia made a very competitive offer for the whole thing. And the seller took it. And I think had that property been marketed as the whole 17 acres, they probably would have sold it differently than we did. But this was an example of somebody just having a little bit of foresight and a little bit of thought and being a little bit creative. And I'm not going to say what they paid. I'm not going to, but I'll say this. They got a very good price on a beautiful home with 17 acres, across the road from the river. I'm super excited for them. So thank you so much for watching. And so here's her advice. Really know what you want. That way your gut will lead you in the right direction. Absolutely. I think that's a good point, Cecilia. I think if you know what you want and have reasonable expectations, I think, and I see this a lot. Look, we help a lot of people buy houses, and there's the Rich and Cecilias of the world that find something. It took them a little bit of time, but it wasn't forever, because they knew what they wanted and they had realistic expectations. If you're trying to buy a house and you've been at it for a month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, a year, and you're serious about buying a house. If you're just casually looking for that long, no problem. But if you're actually trying to buy a house and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months go by, you either are not taking it seriously, you don't know what you want, or you have unrealistic expectations. Because if you have realistic expectations and you know what you want, then you're going to find a house, because there's definitely enough of them out here. And also, Geno, you were so good at showing us. There you go. My pleasure. I'm definitely, I'm honored that you allowed us to serve you. One thing, and Rich and Cecilia are one of the first people we did this. We've been doing so many video tours, and I'm a huge fan within our business, whether it's tours for our clients, whether it's these lives, whether it's any part of what we do. I constantly try to obsess over how do we make this a better experience, because that's how you get people to be clients for life and refer you and come on your YouTube live and say nice things about you. So if you want to look at a property remotely, we can do FaceTime, Zoom, any kind of video tour. Again, the 360 camera. I try to do the best job. My worst nightmare is somebody buying a house without actually seeing it and getting here and hating it, because I think that would be a disappointing start to your trip in Northern Michigan. Driveway easements don't matter. This is funny, because Rich and Cecilia, had they not bought that whole property, they would have had a driveway easement to get into their house. Driveway easements are fine. I think they just need to make sure they're recorded and there's some kind of maintenance agreement. The reason this made the list is we run into it a lot. And you just have to make sure it's spelled out how it's going to be handled. What can the use be? Who has access to it? So definitely make sure there's a lot of that kind of stuff in Northern Michigan. So make sure you're checking it out. HOAs are too strict in Northern Michigan. Now, I don't know what HOAs are like around the rest of the country, but I get so many people that are just terrified of HOAs. And it used to surprise me without knowing the backstory, because there's so many HOAs here, and none of them outside of, Birchwood, Bay Harbor, Crooked Tree, the higher end ones that are a little bit more restrictive. I just listed a house today that had an HOA, and the HOA fee, all it was to plow the private road. So we see a lot of that in Northern Michigan. Don't be afraid of HOAs in Northern Michigan. Make sure you look at the bylaws. And if you make an offer, you're certainly going to have that period. Or if you want to see them ahead of time, we usually have all the bylaws for all the major HOAs. If we don't have it, our title company can get it. So definitely make sure, don't be afraid of HOAs. Take them seriously. Make sure you know what you're getting into, but they're usually not as restrictive as you're probably thinking. You can't sell your house if it doesn't have electrical or plumbing. Now, it'll be harder to sell your house if it doesn't have electrical or plumbing, but we have actually sold a couple of houses that way, and it went perfectly smoothly. If that's what you want, if that's what you know you're getting yourself into, if you want to be true off-grid, which, look, a portion of the population moving to Northern Michigan, that's what they want. There's nothing wrong with that. It might be a little bit tricky to finance. Most banks probably won't touch it because it doesn't have, if it doesn't have a heat source or plumbing or whatever, or what have you. But definitely consider that. Your listing will sell itself as long as it's in Petoskey or Traverse City. This was another YouTube comment. That is also not the truth. Those areas certainly have a ton of demand, but that doesn't mean you can price your house wherever you want it to be, and don't take into consideration what the actual market value is of the house. No home sells itself. That's why realtors exist, and that's why you need to make sure you price it well, present it well, and then it will sell, but it's not just going to sell itself. Andrew McNaughton said, Florida HOAs are out of control. I agree with you. That's where I should have said that, but that's where a lot of the people that talk to me about HOAs or their fear of HOAs, that's where they come from. I've heard things like you can't paint your house a certain, 1,500. Yeah. I mean, Bay Harbor has $1,000 a month HOAs, but that's a lot, $500 to $1,000 a month. Now, Andrew, do you get a lot of amenities down there? Do you get a pool? Do you get golf course access? I mean, the other thing about HOAs, I think you got to be careful because HOAs, sure, $500,000 a month is a lot, but we don't know what amenities come with that, what they cover. I mean, look, if that covers a lot and you get $500 to $1,000, I mean, my guess is the way Andrew presented it, you don't get $500 or $1,000 worth of value. I always tell people, if you're buying in an area that has high HOA fees, just make sure that what you value what you get. So, there's some HOAs here, there's some condos here that, the HOAs are high, but they shovel your sidewalk every morning in the winter. Now, to some people, that's worth it. To some people, they'd rather save the money and do it themselves. So that is definitely something to keep in mind. You need this is another one. You need a survey to sell your house in Northern Michigan. Now, some areas that's the case, not in Northern Michigan. You don't have to have a survey to sell your house. With so many, unless you're in a subdivision with so many properties here being rural or, outside of town, or again, not in platted subdivisions or in the city limits. I would probably advise having a survey if there's any fear of encumbrances, or maybe the neighbor has a shed on your property or fence lines or garage. I would say that's case by case. Whether it's me or another great realtor, make sure that when you buy a piece of property, you have a general idea of where the boundaries are and there's no encroachments or anything encumbering the property lines. Hi, new subscriber here. I visited for Vale Huskin. New subscriber here. I visited Petoskey for 4 days over Memorial Day weekend because of your reviews. I came to YouTube looking for info and came across your channel. Thank you. Very helpful. Vale, thank you so much. If you're still watching, drop a comment. Let me know, what did you do when you were here for Memorial Day? It was a great weekend. I actually wasn't here. I think Memorial Day weekend is one of the best weekends in Northern Michigan. Memorial Day and Labor Day, the bookends of the summer, I think, are some of the best times to be in Northern Michigan because for the spring, it's when everything comes back to life. We get busy again. Summer is just around the corner, or so it feels. And then Labor Day, it's like the last hurrah. It goes from being as busy as it can be to nobody's here overnight. And I just think that's such an interesting experience. So Vale, thank you so much. Thank you for subscribing. Thanks for joining us. And if you have any questions, let us know. Where'd you stay? Where'd you hang out? What was your favorite restaurant? So we'd love to hear from you. All lake access is public and unrestricted. Now, most lakes, so we have what's called riparian rights in Northern Michigan, meaning along the Great Lakes, anybody can walk the shoreline. Now, you can't stop and hang out, but anybody can walk the shoreline. Whether you have a $10 million house on the water on the Great Lakes, you can't stop anybody from walking in your backyard. Now, it's different on in the lakes because that is private waterfront. So every lake most of the lakes here are privately owned. Almost all of them have access for people to get on the lakes. Local taxes are all the same across counties. Not only are they not the same, that's a myth. Not only are they not the same across counties, they're not the same across townships, meaning Zorn Township is different than Bear Creek Township. It's different than the city of Petoskey, is different than Littlefield. So definitely taxes are a huge element to purchasing a home. That is a great question. You're more than welcome to reach out to me to ask me about taxes on a specific house, but North Michigan has a great website. If you just Google the state of Michigan property tax estimator, click on the link. It'll ask you to put in the SEV, which is just call it half the value of the house, the township, the school district, and whether it's going to be homestead or not homestead. And it will spit out the taxes and tell you exactly what you should expect to pay. And that is a very helpful tip. So a couple more, then I'll hop off for the night. If you have any questions, please drop them in the comments. If you're watching this live, I really appreciate it. If you're watching the recording, I also appreciate it. If you've been following me and this content is your type of thing, make sure you hit that subscribe button. That way you never miss a video. As we get into summer, we've got some really cool videos coming that we're going to do on location. And it seems like every year we get more and more people that are, every year we work harder and harder to get better and better videos. And I think that is the reason that this channel continues to grow, in addition to have a great community like you that show up every week, watch the lives, watch the videos, you comment, you share this with your friends. So again, I really appreciate you being here. Locals won't work with out of town agents. This is sort of personal. I think it's goofy when an agent goes out of their way to drive to Northern Michigan to sell a house. One, I just don't think it's a great use of their time. Two, I think it's a disservice to their clients because they don't really know the market. But every client has the right to work with whoever they want to work with. And if you have your best friend or brother-in-law or brother in Metro Detroit and you want them to come to Petoskey to sell you a house, I'm going to let them sell you a house. So my job is to get the best deal for my client. And if that means they're working with an agent in Northern Michigan or not in Northern Michigan, I'm going to help them either way. So that is just my 2 cents on the matter. This is the last one for the night. And this is a big one because this one actually surprises me. I can't tell you how many times I've had this debate on. Actually, I've had this debate so many times that I stop having it because I'm never going to win it. A lot of people say Northern Michigan doesn't start until you cross the Mackinac Bridge. And as somebody that's lived in Northern Michigan their entire life, that is simply not true. But there are people on the internet. Somebody's going to watch this video all the way till minute 51 and see this and comment and say, you're wrong. The Upper Peninsula is Northern Michigan and below the bridge is not Northern Michigan. So we often have a debate of where Northern Michigan starts. I believe it starts at US 10, which is right around Cadillac in North. That to me, I'm driving from downstate, whether it's from Grand Rapids or the middle of the state or Detroit, that's where it feels like Northern Michigan. And I used to make the snarky comment when people would say that I would argue that the Upper Peninsula is called the Upper Peninsula, not Northern Michigan. Now, look, I know Northern Michigan University's up there. I know that's obviously as north as you can get, not only in Michigan, but in the country. And then we have, so I don't know. People like to troll me. I don't know where this is. It amazes me, guys. It amazes me that this is even an argument, but I don't know. I'm really curious. I don't know. I think about this all the time, and I don't understand why people think that. But Vale said, we had a blast. Okay, we stayed at Bay Harbor at the inn. Great place. First 2 nights, dinner at the Chop House. Went to North Pre Coffee. I've seen one of your videos. Tried Me Tequila. Not a favorite. And looks like we got cut off. So a lot to dig into on this. Inn at Bay Harbor is one of my favorite hotels in Northern Michigan. They do a great job. They have Vintage Chop House, which is what they're sorry. I'm sorry, Val. I'm not sure if you're he or she, so I don't want to offend you. What they are talking about, get the filet with the duck fat sauce at the Vintage Chop House. My favorite meal in Petoskey. North Park Coffee, just went there this morning. I go there almost every day in the summertime. Me Tequila, I don't want to throw shade at anybody. The only Mexican restaurant, my favorite Mexican restaurant, if you're ever in Petoskey again and you want to try Mexican, across the street from my office is a little place called Jose's. Jose is a good friend of mine. He's a maniac. He's a lot of fun. He doesn't speak a ton of English, so our conversations are very interesting, but he is the biggest Green Bay Packer fan ever. If you go to my website, genodangelo.com, I've got a little video, and you're going to see me taking a picture with a little man, a little guy on the homepage, and that is Jose. He's got some American flag sunglasses on, so that's Jose. A different steakhouse the last day, but I'll have to write his name. We walked downtown every day, and parking was available each day. 25 cents an hour is unbeatable. See, that's so funny, Vale, because a lot of people think 25 cents an hour is a lot. But I think that's funny that you said that's affordable. I do think they increase it in the summertime. I don't know. I don't pay for parking. We have Park Mobile. So when I pull up, I'll often have my assistant Candace just start the meter for me on the app. Or sometimes I just gamble and don't pay. And that's why I have 75 tickets at the end of the year. Yeah. I'm curious what your other steakhouse was. Was it Spring and Porter? Was it Chandler's? Was it Pour? Was it Pallet? So yeah, drop a comment. We're gonna hop off here in a second, Vale, but if your husband thinks about it, Jose absolutely rules. Absolutely. If you can't go downtown Petoskey without visiting Jose. Best tacos in Northern Michigan, best nachos in Northern Michigan, fajitas, quesadilla, they've got it all. Jose does a great job and definitely one of my favorite lunch spots, and not just because it's 2 seconds from my office. Our first visit up north will definitely be going back. You may or may not know this, but you passed right by my office to go to North Perk. And if you're ever up here again, I'm here most days during working hours. On Thursdays, I'm here at 7 o'clock at night. Stop and say hi. Love to meet you and shake your hand, and maybe we can walk to North Perk and I'll buy you a coffee. Again, another great live. This is why I enjoy doing them. Sherlock the Pug, one of my favorite watchers. I would say Traverse City and up is Northern Michigan. Yeah, but I still think places south. I still think Kingsley, Mesick. I still think those, even Baldwin, I think that's still Northern Michigan. Do you know anything about buying on or near a reservation? I noticed half of Mount Pleasant seems to be on a reservation. I know there are a couple on Sutton's Bay and near Harbor Springs. Andrew, I didn't know. That doesn't surprise me about Mount Pleasant. I didn't know that there's, let me Google this real quick. The short answer is I don't know about buying on Indian reservations. I'm going to Google this right now in Harbor Springs. Little Traverse Bay. Okay, so Little Better Odawa Indians. I'm familiar with that. I'm going to have to check into this because I don't know. No, I guess, Andrew, the short answer is no. This is something I definitely need to learn. It might be, maybe it's, I don't know. I'll have to look into this. I've been selling here for so long that I've never run into this. Are you able to actually, maybe the reservation is just, it's protected and maybe you're not able to buy there, and maybe that's why I'm not familiar with it. I really want to move to Traverse City, but there's some fear that I won't be able to afford it. Without knowing your budget, I would say there is a chance you can afford it. Traverse City, Petoskey alike, get a bad rap for being expensive. And look, they are expensive, but there are places there, I'd have to learn more about your situation, but even Ian just mentioned something about I'm going to answer this question. I'll get to that. Reach out to me if you want. Just send me a email or message, or go on my website and fill out a contact form. I'd love to talk to you about this further, and no obligation. I'm not going to harass you or force you to buy a house here, but I'd love to learn a little bit more about your situation. And then I can easily tell you, yeah, this is something worth considering, or maybe not. I actually had somebody that called me earlier this week, and when they told me what they're looking for and what they're hoping to spend, I told them that probably wasn't the best fit here, unfortunately, which is my least favorite thing to do. But they're appreciative, and they started looking in another area, and they called me back to thank me. So yeah, feel free to reach out. I'll gladly tell you what I think about what you're trying to accomplish and if it's reasonable or not. And you might be surprised. I mean, I don't know what your budget is. I don't know what your expectations are, but I'd be surprised if there wasn't a way to find a spot in or around Traverse City that would suit your needs. There are specific loans for tribe members that want to purchase. Ian, do you know anything? I feel bad that I don't know this. Ian, have you done deals like that, Ian? I'm going to wait for him just a couple seconds to weigh in. But again, Rabid Babies brings up a good point that reach out to me. If you have any questions about Northern Michigan, or just the reason I put these videos out, and I think oftentimes people think that, they're going to reach out to a salesperson. And look, I'm a real estate agent, which is a salesperson by definition, but I make these videos to be helpful. And I understand that when you put a lot of information out, you're going to get questions. So if you reach out to me and ask anything about Northern Michigan, I got an email from somebody yesterday that was asking about, if I was worried about how expensive houses have gotten, and I emailed them back right away. So if you email or text me or call me and you have questions about anything that's going on, look, I make these videos. I truly want to help you become the most educated buyer or seller, or figure out if Northern Michigan is right for you. So reach out to me. Just drop me a line. Let me know whatever I can do to help you. Our bids, my friend Ken Horan, our bids exceeding list price this season sometimes. seeing houses sell for, um, seeing houses sell for list price or over is a lot more narrow than it used to be, and typically only happens in the first window of a house being on the market. Ken, if you're looking at a house that's been out there for, you know, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, you are likely going to spend under ask price, and that's where you're going to find the best values. So Ian says, going back to the tribal land there, we're pre-approved. Okay. Ian, are any of those near us though? Ian's in Traverse City, but in terms of Harbor Springs, I have not heard about that in Harbor Springs. The product in this, hey, this is why Ian watches the show, because he can add more value to this conversation than I can. The product version of FHA is called HUD 184. We're going to have Ian back on a live. I want to start having him on once a quarter, especially in times like this when the mortgage world is changing as much as the real estate world. And I think in an attempt to make you guys as educated as possible and answer as many questions as possible, Ian can definitely add some value to you guys, especially with questions like this or anything like that. Ken said, join late. Glad to see this. We talked about a lot tonight, Ken. We debunked a lot of myths. So make sure you go back and watch from the start. I appreciate you always tuning in. We went a little bit over tonight. I apologize. Ian said there's a reservation between Traverse and okay, interesting. Yeah, I'm going to message you offline just to learn more about that. That's that Traverse City, Kalkaska area. I don't do much there, but I would. And certainly if any of you wanted to look there, I'd love to help you. Again, thank you so much for watching. We will be back on, actually next week. The live is probably going to be on Wednesday. I've got a really cool listing up in Northport, which is north of Traverse City. Really cool house. It's called the Chameleon House. We're going to be doing a drone shoot, a really high-end video shoot there to sort of highlight the house. So I will be on Wednesday next week, I believe. In the meantime, this is the thick of the season. A lot's happening. I'm already starting to work on my halftime recap that we're going to do on YouTube to tell you exactly what is going on in Northern Michigan for the first half of 2025. I can't believe we're already there, and half the year is almost over. It has been, I'm being honest with you guys as my friends and people that show up every week to support us. This first half of 2025 has been unlike anything we have seen in a long time. So it seems to be roaring back, and I can only imagine what the second half is going to be like, but the first half has been interesting to say the least. I'm really excited to compile my thoughts, look at some data, analyze some stuff, and come back and tell you exactly where we were after the first half. We're going to be in the locker room, huddling up, trying to figure out how to win the second half. And I'm excited to do that for you guys. So again, thank you as always. If you've not yet subscribed, it would mean the world to me if you do so, and I will see you next week.